What's going on, guys? Maurice here, Git Vlog episode something or other. I don't know, I haven't done these in a while, but what I do know is it's the very first kind of comprehensive gear review video that I'm doing. And today we're going to be reviewing the Canon XF400. And there it is. The Canon XF400 is a ENG style camera. It is the successor to the XF300/305 in the long line of XF series cameras, starting from the XF100, and here we are today. And so what I have here is the Canon XF400. The only difference between the 405 and the 400 is that the 405 has a 3G SDIL, which I never need, so I definitely wasn't going to spend an additional $500 for that feature. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give a quick rundown of some general specifications. Again, if you have any really detailed specifications that you're after, you can go to any kind of, B&H or any camera sales website and find the camera and drill down to the specific specification that you're looking for. But again, I'm going to start off with kind of these general specs about the camera. And then I'm going to talk about who I think this camera is perfect for, who I think it's not good for, and finally why I chose to get it. And then after I give that kind of general overview, bullet point kind of style talk about the camera, we're going to dive into some sample footage and to validate whether or not indeed it's going to suit my needs that I think that the specs at least say they're perfect for. Cool. So let's first go into general specifications. So the XF400 is Canon's probably first camcorder or professional grade camcorder that is able to shoot in 4K. It's not true 4K, it's UHD. But 4K nonetheless. As you all know, Canon's been lagging really far behind in terms of, bringing 4K to their cameras compared to basically everyone else. And so that's, I guess, a sort of anticlimactic, exciting thing. I mean, it's finally here. But in terms of a camcorder itself, this is a camcorder that has a 1-inch sensor. That's pretty great. 1-inch sensor has two benefits, or two main benefits. The two main benefits it has is, number one, it'll have superior low light performance to other or previous Canon camcorders with significantly smaller sensors. And number two, it'll have a shallower depth of field. So even though this is not a cinema camera, you're going to be able to get some shallow depth of field. Definitely nowhere in comparison to like the C100 that I'm shooting on right now with, with a wider lens or even a DSLR. But hey, a 1-inch sensor, I'm not complaining. Spec-wise, I mean, on the wide end, this lens sits at an f2.8 and has a full frame equivalent of approximately 24 millimeters. And then it has a 15 times optical zoom in 4K. When you're shooting in full HD 1080, it has an additional 15. So you can go 30 times in as it crops into the 4K sensor, and according to Canon, and this is subject to, I guess, other people and my own test videos, the claim is that there's no image degradation when you're going into that additional digital zoom when you're shooting in full HD. So that's useful. What else does it have? It has a top handle that has two XLR inputs with manual controls over here up top on the other side of the handle. In terms of bitrate and frame rate, at 4K UHD, it shoots at 150 megabits per second at up to 60 frames per second. And in full HD, it shoots up to 35 megabits per second up to 120 frames per second with true overcrank for slow motion. Unfortunately, it only does 8-bit 420. There is no internal 10-bit 422. And it also, unfortunately, does not shoot in C-Log. It does, however, have YDR, and YDR is something that I use if I have a really fast turnaround project that I have to do with a client when I'm shooting on the C100. So who do I think this camera is great for? I think this camera is perfect for one-person shooter scenarios. It's also great for agile, aggressive run-and-gun documentary filmmaking teams. This camera is touted as an ENG camera. Don't quite see the balance there. To my understanding, when it comes to broadcast, you definitely need that 10-bit 422, maybe for digital news consumption. I think this camera is also great for event coverage. It's perfect with the image stabilization and the professional audio to be able to walk around on a trade show floor and be filming a host, whether it's directly plugged in with a reporter style microphone or with wireless lavs, that kind of a thing. I guess in a nutshell, I would say that I think that this camera is a good solution. Not great, definitely not perfect, but I think this camera is a good solution for professional work. And when I say professional, I mean you're getting paid for it, but not broadcast, not Hollywood, nothing like that. There are professional enough features for it to be able to achieve a net result for professional deliverables in, whether it's like kind of corporate video, again, events, or run and gun documentary style filmmaking. Who do I think this camera is not good for? I definitely would not recommend this camera if this is going to be your only camera that you're shooting with. For a few reasons. Number one, I'm a big fan of interchangeable lenses. If you're only going to have one camera, I think that the ability to have really dedicated lenses for specific storytelling scenarios is really important. I also think that if you're only going to have one camera and you have the budget, you should probably get a camera that has a capability of shooting 10-bit 422 and also has some kind of log color profile for more latitude when it comes to color grading and just greater dynamic range in general. So why did I choose to get this camera? I'd say that there are 4 main reasons why I chose to get this camera, but the absolute most important reason is for it to serve as an alternate angle when I'm shooting interviews. I shoot a lot of interviews, and you know, I've been able to make it work with just my C100 Mark II, whether it's kind of, you know, pausing the interview very briefly and just switching angles slightly, or just, you know, having a zoom lens on there and being able to zoom in a bit. But I just want to have a dedicated second angle for my interviews. And that kind of bleeds into color matching, right? On paper, this camera would be able to color match seamlessly with the C100 Mark II. They both shoot in internal 8-bit 420. They both shoot in HD at 35 megabits per second. And they both shoot in Canon's YDR picture profile. And so with kind of those 3 general criteria, in theory, they should be able to color match perfectly. If they can't, then this camera's going right back. I'm returning it immediately. But beyond that, this camera also fills in 3 gaps that my C100 Mark II has. And, you know, they weren't tragic, but there's just been a noticeable amount of times where I wish that my C100 Mark II could do, you know, slow motion at greater than 60 frames per second. And so this in HD will shoot in 120 frames per second. There are times where I wish my C100 Mark II had image stabilization, optical image stabilization in body, because there are times that, you know, I am shooting handheld or I'm on a gimbal on my Ronin M, and I just feel like that would help it. And lastly, despite the C100 Mark II still having that fantastic dual pixel CMOS AF that Canon is known for, it is limited to just the center of the frame. And so, you know, depending on what I'm shooting, being able to have kind of touch AF across the entire frame, or most of the entire frame, is something that I've craved with the C100 Mark II as well. And so those are the 3 gaps that this camera is able to fill, all while satisfying that primary criteria of being able to color match seamlessly as I'm cutting between shots of these cameras. So before I get into the test footage, I am going to just mention, is it an elephant in the room? Whatever it is, I'm gonna mention what I kind of perceive as the main competitor to the XF400, which is the Sony HXR NX80. I'm just going to straight up say that, at least on paper, if you don't have the specific use case that I have, which is to color match a specific camera that you already own, the Sony HXR NX80, it either matches or exceeds every specification that this camera has, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but on top of the fact that it either matches or exceeds the XF400 in basically every single specification, it's also $700 less. That's 1,000 Canadian dollars less. Okay, so for the first part of the test footage, what I've done here is I've kind of set up the C100 Mark II and the XF400, kind of emulating a dual camera interview setup. Both are set at f4, both are set at dB at 15 in terms of the gain, the sensitivity. And color temperature wise, they're both set at 5200 Kelvin, and so this should give a decent idea in terms of how well we can color match, right? I've basically matched you know, all the settings as closely as I possibly can. And the next thing I'm gonna do, just for kind of shits and giggles, is to just do a slow motion test. As you can see in the slow motion test, I think that this 120 frames per second slow motion is definitely passable, at least for the kind of use cases that I have for them. I will say though that it's not kind of as crisp as I would have liked to see, but I do think that it still is absolutely beautiful slow motion, and you can kind of decide for yourself. This next kind of test shot, I've taken kind of 2 objects. I've tried my hardest to kind of set up identical shots. You're gonna see that they're not. I'm gonna have this C100 Mark II footage, and then I'm going to now overlay just kind of like a half crop of both objects directly on top that's shot with the XF400. And I mean, you know, you can be the judge with your own eyes, but I'm happy with the results. Just kind of pay attention to where the edge of the cropped box meets the objects. In my opinion, it does a fantastic job of color matching in Biggie's sweater, as well as I feel like the Supreme little toolbox there looks more or less identical. So I want to close up with some final thoughts I have about the XF400 and my full day working with it. And this really is a fantastic little camera. I don't really have too many complaints, but the complaints that I do have are probably pretty big ones. So the first ones are the ones that we already mentioned before, right? I mean, it just makes no sense. Why wouldn't you have log in here? Why wouldn't you have, you know, 10-bit 422 in here? Just seems silly. But again, it's not a hindrance for the kind of client work that I do, right, on a regular basis. My Other gripe is that in comparison with the C100 Mark II and kind of any of the Cinema EOS, I mean, you can't even compare just price-wise, but the lack of physical buttons on this guy is pretty annoying, right? So, but again, that's just me being spoiled in the past with a lot of physical buttons for every possible kind of variable. I do have to give credit to Canon though. Their user interface, you know, in terms of the menu system, the touch menu system on the touchscreen is fantastic. It's as good as it could be, in my opinion. One thing I really hate is the placement of the menu button, which is right next to the battery. It's really tough to get to. In fact, it's a lot easier oftentimes to just use the remote control it comes with just to even press menu and get to it. I don't understand why, you know, these assignable buttons next to the screen, why one of them wasn't menu. There's even seems to be like a place for a button, but it's really just a plug that, you know, anyways, that's kind of like my main gripe with it. But other than that, look, the net result is, yes, I am going to keep this. I like the way that the footage kind of syncs up together. It still needs a little bit of grading, and I believe that it's a combination of my lack of experience with the camera. I'm sure that I can, you know, through, you know, actually testing more and more and more to be able to make the colors and kind of the overall look match perfectly with the C100 Mark II. It's just going to require a little bit of tweaking on my part. One thing I had never even considered before purchasing this camera was the fact that it's a fixed lens camera. I've never owned one. Having a fixed lens camera, of course, is a huge drawback because, again, you can't swap out lenses for storytelling purposes. But it actually has a benefit, right? Which is the convenience factor. I know all of us want to kind of work on our passion projects, or better yet, be able to get paid while being creatively engaged with client work. But the fact of the matter is oftentimes client work is drab. For example, every couple of weeks I get called to law firms to film legal depositions, which are just like, kill me now type situations, but they keep the lights on, right? They pay the bills. And, you know, before getting this camera, you know, every single time I had to go film a legal deposition, I'd be bringing the C100 Mark II and I'd bring the lazy person's kit, right? Which is the 24-70 and the 70-200 as a just in case. And so for some reason, I would always bring, you know, at least those two lenses. Whereas now I can just bring this one guy. And if you look at it, it really is basically the same size and weight as just the 70-200 millimeter lens, right? So, you know, I originally got this camera, as you guys know, for one very specific use case, which is an alternate interview angle while being able to seamlessly color match in wide DR. But looks like there is, after all, an ancillary benefit, and that is to be able to just bring this guy, the convenience and lightweight travel factor. I hope you guys got value out of this. I don't know how many people have the exact same kind of main reason for considering this camera as me, which is specifically to be able to color match seamlessly with the C100 Mark II. But I hope you got some value out of it. If you did, please like the video, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Peace out.